Hello and welcome to this Thursday, August 29th, 2019 episode of the Law of Success Mastermind. This is actually episode 56. It's Keys to Success, Lesson 7, Self-Control. You can do it if you believe you can. Now, if you are on Instagram, I am doing this introduction to Instagram. Check out our YouTube or head on over to thelawofsuccessmastermind.com. There's a podcast tab on the menu, and you can view all of our podcasts, listen to all of them. That resource is there for you. Thank you. Let's jump into it. Self-control, the law of success. You can do it if you believe you can. In the preceding lesson, you learned of the value of enthusiasm. You also learned how to generate enthusiasm and how to transmit its influence to others through the principle of suggestion. You come now to the study of self-control, through which you may direct your enthusiasm to constructive ends. Without self-control, enthusiasm resembles the unharnessed lightning of an electrical storm. It may strike anywhere. It may destroy life and property. Enthusiasm is the vital quality that arouses you to action, while self-control is that directs your action so that it will build up and not tear down. Very, very good. These videos don't have any sound. For some reason. I don't know what's going on with my Instagrams not having sound. To be a person who is well balanced, you must be a person in whom enthusiasm and self-control are equalized. A person, which I have just completed, of the 160,000 adult inmates of the penitentiaries of the United States, discloses the startling fact that 92% of these unfortunate men and women are in prison because they lacked the necessary self-control to direct their energies constructively. Read the foregoing paragraph again. It is authentic. It is startling. It is a fact that the majority of man's griefs come about through lack of self-control. The Holy Scriptures are full of admonition in support of self-control. They even urge us to love our enemies and to forgive those who injure us. The law of non-resistance runs like a golden cord throughout the Bible. Study the records of those whom the world calls great, and observe that every one of them possesses this quality of self-control. For example, study the characteristics of your own immortal Lincoln. In the midst of his most trying hours, he exercised patience, poise, and self-control. These were some of the qualities which made him the great man that he was. He found disloyalty in some of the members of his cabinet, but for the reason that this disloyalty was toward him personally, and because those in whom he found it had qualities which made them valuable to his country, Lincoln exercised self-control and disregarded the objectionable qualities. How many men do you know who have self-control to equal this? In language more forceful than it was polished, Billy Sunday exclaimed from the pulpit, "There is something as rotten as hell about the man who is always trying to show some other fellow up." I wonder if the devil didn't yell, "Amen, brother," when Billy made that statement. However, self-control becomes an important factor in this reading course on the law of success. Not so much because lack of it works hardships on those who become its victims, as for the reason that those who do not exercise it suffer the loss of great power which they need in their struggle for achievement of their definite chief aim. If you neglect to exercise self control, you are not only likely to injure others, but you are sure to injure yourself. All right, now I figured out how to get audio into. I don't know what happened, why the audio didn't go on the others. That's odd. But I'm learning, and that's the whole point of this is to all learn together. During the early part of my public career, I discovered what havoc lack of self control was playing in my life. And this discovery came about through a very commonplace incident. I believe it not out of place here to digress by making the statement that most of the great truths of life are wrapped up in the ordinary, commonplace events of everyday life. This discovery taught me one of the most important lessons I have ever learned. It came about in this way. One day, in the building in which I had my office, the janitor and I had a misunderstanding. This led to a most violent form of mutual dislike between us. As a means of showing his contempt for me, this janitor would switch off the electric lights of the building when he knew that I was there alone at work in my study. This happened on several occasions until I finally decided to strike back. My opportunity came one Sunday when I came to my study to prepare an address that I had to deliver the following night. I had hardly seated myself at my desk when off went the lights. I jumped to my feet and ran toward the basement of the building where I knew I would find the janitor. When I arrived, I found him busily engaged shoveling coal into the furnace and whistling as though nothing unusual had happened. Without ceremony, I pitched into him, and for 5 minutes I hurled objectives at him which were hotter than the fire that he was feeding. Finally, I ran out of words and had to slow down. Then he straightened himself up, looked back over his shoulder, and in a calm, smooth tone of voice that was full of poise and self control, and with a smile on his face that reached from ear to ear, he said, "Why, y'all's just a little bit excited this morning, ain't you?" That remark cut as though it had been a stiletto. Imagine my feelings as I stood there before an illiterate man who could neither read nor write, but who, despite this handicap, had defeated me in a duel and had been fought on grounds and with the weapon of my own choice. My conscience pointed an accusing finger at me. I knew that not only had I been defeated, but what was worse, I knew that I was the aggressor and that I was in the wrong, which only served to intensify my humiliation. Not only did my conscience point an accusing finger at me, but it placed some very embarrassing thoughts in my mind. It mocked me and it tantalized me. There I stood, a boasted student of advanced psychology, an exponent of the Golden Rule philosophy, having at least a fair acquaintance with the works of Shakespeare, Socrates, Plato, Emerson, and the Bible. While facing me stood a man who knew nothing of literature or of philosophy, but who had, despite this lack of knowledge, whipped me in a battle of words. I turned and went back to my office as rapidly as I could go. There was nothing else for me to do. As I began to think the matter over, I saw my mistake. But true to nature, I was reluctant to do which I knew must be done to right the wrong. I knew that I would have to apologize to that man before I could place myself at peace in my own heart, much less with him. Finally, I made up my mind to go back down to the basement and suffer this humility which I knew I had to undergo. The decision was not easily reached, nor did I reach it quickly. I started down, but I walked more slowly than I had when I went down the first trip. I was trying to think how I would make the second approach so as to suffer the least humiliation possible. When I got to the basement, I called to the janitor to come over to the door. In a calm, kindly tone of voice, he asked, "What do you wish this time?" I informed him that I had come back to apologize for the wrong I had done. If he would permit me to do so, again, that smile spread all over his face, and he said, "For the love of the Lord, you don't have to apologize. Nobody heard you except these four walls and you and me. I ain't going to tell it, and I know you ain't going to tell it, so just forget it. The man who actually knows just what he wants in life has already gone a long way toward attaining it." And that remark hurt more than the first one, for he had not only expressed a willingness to forgive me, but he had actually indicated his willingness to help me cover the incident up, so it would not become known and do me an injury. But I walked over to him and took him by the hand. I shook with more than my hand. I shook with my heart. And as I walked back to my office, I felt good for having summoned the courage with which to right the wrong I had done. This is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning. Following this incident, I made a resolution that I would never again place myself in a position in which another man, whether it be an illiterate janitor or a man of letters, could humiliate me because I had lost my self control. Following that resolution, a remarkable change began to take place in me. My pen began to take on greater power. My spoken words began to carry greater weight. I began to make more friends and fewer enemies among men of my acquaintance. The incident marked one of the most important turning points of my life. It taught me that no man can control others unless he controls himself. It gave me a clear conception of the philosophy back of these words. Whom the God whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. It also gave me a clear conception of the law of non-resistance and helped me to interpret many passages of the Holy Scriptures bearing on the subject of this law as I had never before interpreted them. This incident placed in my hands the passkey to a storehouse of knowledge that is illuminating and helpful in all that I do. And later in life, when enemies sought to destroy me, it gave me a powerful weapon of defense that was that has never failed me. Lack of self-control is the average salesman's most damaging weakness. The prospective buyer says something that the salesman does not wish to hear, and if he has not the quality of self-control, he will strike back with a counter remark that is fatal to his sale. In one of the large department stores of Chicago, I witnessed an incident that illustrated the importance of self-control. A long line of women were in front of the complaint desk, telling their troubles and the store's faults to the young woman in charge. Some of the women were angry and unreasonable, and some of them made very ugly remarks. The young woman at the desk received the disgruntled women without the slightest sign of resentment at their remarks. With a smile on her face, she directed these women to the proper departments with such charming grace and poise that I marveled at her self control. Standing just back of her was another young woman who was making notations on slips of paper and passing them in front of her. As the woman in the line unburdened their troubles. These slips of paper contained the gist of what the women in line were saying, minus the vitriolic coloring and the anger. The smiling young woman at the desk, who was hearing the complaints, was stone deaf. Her assistant supplied her with all the necessary facts through those slips of paper. I was so impressed with the plan that I sought the manager of the store and interviewed him. He informed me that he had selected a deaf woman for one of the most trying and important positions in the store for the reason that he had not been able to find any other person with sufficient self control to fill the place. As I stood and watched the line of angry women, I observed what pleasant effect the smile of the young woman at the desk had upon them. They came before her growling like wolves and went away as meek and quiet as sheep. In fact, some of them had sheepish looks on their faces as they left, because the young woman's self-control had made them ashamed of themselves. Ever since I witnessed that scene, I have thought of the poise and self-control of that young woman at the desk every time I felt myself becoming irritated at remarks which I did not like. And often I have thought that everybody should have a set of mental earmuffs, which they could slip over their ears at times. Personally, I have developed the habit of closing my ears against much of the idle chatter, such as I used to make it my business to resent. Life is too short, and there is too much construction work to be done to justify us in striking back at everyone who says that which we do not wish to hear. In the practice of law, I have observed a very clever trick that trial lawyers use when they wish to get a statement of facts from a belligerent witness who answers questions with the proverbial, I do not remember or I do not know. When everything else fails, they manage to make such a witness angry, and in this state of mind, they cause him to lose his self control and make statements that he would not have made had he kept a cool head. Most of us go through life with our weather eye cast skyward in quest of trouble. We usually find that for which we are looking. In my travels, I have been a student of men whom I have heard in Pullman car conversation. And I have observed that practically 9 out of every 10 have so little self control that they will invite themselves into the discussion of almost any subject that may be brought up. But few men are contented to sit in a smoking compartment and listen to to a conversation without joining in and airing their views. Once I was traveling from Albany to New York City. On the way down the smoking car club, s- on the way down, the smoking car club started a conversation about the late Richard Croker, who was then chief of Tammany Hall. The discussion became loud and bitter. Everyone became angry except one old gentleman who was agitating the argument and taking a lively interest in it. He remained calm and seemed to enjoy all the mean things the others said about the tiger of Tammany Hall. Of course, I supposed that he was an enemy of the Tammany chief, but he wasn't. He was Richard Croker himself. This was one of his clever tricks, through which he found out what people thought of him and what his enemies' plans were. Whatever else Richard Croker might have been, he was a man of self control. Perhaps that is one reason why he remained undisputed boss of Tammany Hall, as long as he did. Men who control themselves usually boss the job, no matter what it may be. Please read again the last sentence of the preceding paragraph, for it carries a subtle suggestion that might be of profit to you. This is a commonplace incident, but it is in just such incidents that the great truths of life are hidden. Hidden because the settings are ordinary and commonplace. Not long ago, I accompanied my wife on a bargain hunting bee. Our attention was attracted by a crowd of women who were elbowing each other out of the way in front of the petticoat counter at which bargains were being offered. One lady, who looked to be about 45 years of age, crawled on her hands and knees through the crowd and bobbed up in front of a customer who had engaged the attention of the saleswoman ahead of her. In a loud, high pitched tone of voice, she demanded attention. The saleswoman was a diplomat who understood human nature. She also possessed self control, for she smiled sweetly at the intruder and said, Yes, miss, I will be with you in a moment. The intruder calmed herself. I do not know whether it was the yes, miss, or the sweet tone in which it was said that modified her attitude, but it was one or the other. Perhaps it was both. I do know, however, that the saleswoman was rewarded for her self control by the sale of 3 petticoats, and the happy miss went away feeling much younger for the remark. Roast turkey is a very popular dish, but overeating of it cost a friend of mine, who is in the printing business, a $50,000 order. It happened the day after Thanksgiving when I called at his office for the purpose of introducing him to a prominent Russian who had come to the United States to publish a book. The Russian spoke broken English, and it was therefore hard for him to make himself easily understood. During the interview, he asked my printer friend a question which was mistaken as a reflection upon his ability as a printer. In an unguarded moment, he countered with this remark: "The trouble with you Bolsheviks is that you look with suspicion on the remainder of the world just because of your own short-sightedness." My Bolshevik friend nudged me on the elbow and whispered, "The gentleman seems to be sick. We shall call again when he is feeling better." But he never called again. He placed his order with another printer, and I learned afterward that the profit on that order was more than $10,000. $10,000 seems a high price to pay for a plate of turkey. But that is the price that it cost my printer friend, for he offered me an apology for his conduct on the ground that his turkey dinner had given him indigestion and therefore he had lost his self-control. One of the largest chain store concerns in the world has adopted a unique, though effective, method of employing salespeople who have developed the essential quality of self-control, which all successful salespeople must possess. This concern has in its employ a very clever woman who visits department stores and other places where salespeople are employed and selects certain ones whom she believes to possess tact and self-control. But to be sure of her judgment, she approaches these salespeople and has them show her their wares. She asks all sorts of questions that are designed to try their patience. If they stand the test, they are offered better positions. If they fail in the test, they have merely allowed a good opportunity to pass by without knowing it. No doubt all people who refuse or neglect to exercise self-control are literally turning opportunity after opportunity away without knowing it. One day I was standing at the glove counter of a large retail store talking to a young man who was employed there. He was telling me that he had been with the store 4 years, but on account of the short-sightedness of the store, his services had not been appreciated and he was looking for another position. In the midst of this conversation, a customer walked up to him and asked to see some hats. He paid no attention to the customer's inquiry until he had finished telling me his troubles, despite the fact that the customer was obviously becoming impatient. Finally, he turned to the customer and said, "This isn't the hat department." When the customer inquired to where he might find the department, the young man replied, "Ask the floor walker over there. He will direct you." For 4 years, this young man had been standing on top of a fine opportunity, but he did not know it. He could have made a friend of every person whom he served in that store, and these friends could have made him one of the most valuable men in the store, because they would have come back to trade with him. Snappy answers to inquiring customers do not bring them back. One rainy afternoon, an old lady walked into a Pittsburgh department store and wandered around in an aimless sort of way, very much in the manner that people who have no intention of buying often do. Most of the salespeople gave her the once over and buried themselves by straightening the stock on their shelves so as to avoid being troubled by her. One of the young men saw her and made it his business to inquire politely if he might serve her. She informed him that she was only waiting for it to stop raining, that she did not wish to make any purchases. The young man assured her that she was welcome, and by engaging her in conversation made her feel that he had meant what he said. When he was ready to go, he accompanied her to the street and raised her umbrella for her. She asked for his card and went on her way. The incident had been forgotten by the young man when one day he was called into the office by the head of the firm and shown a letter from a lady who wanted a salesman to go to Scotland and take an order for the furnishings for a mansion. The lady was Andrew Carnegie's mother. She was also the same woman who the young man had so courteously escorted to the street many months previously. In the letter, Mrs. Carnegie specified that this young man was the one whom she desired to be sent to take her order. That order amounted to an enormous sum, and the incident brought the young man an opportunity for advancement that he might not have had except for for his courtesy to an old lady who did not look like a ready sail. Just as the great fundamental laws of life are wrapped up in the commonest sort of everyday experiences that most of us never notice, so are the real opportunities often hidden in the seemingly unimportant transactions of life. Ask the next 10 people whom you meet why they have not accomplished more in their respective lines of endeavor, and at least 9 of them will tell you that opportunity does not seem to come around their way. Go a step further and analyze each of these 9 accurately by observing their actions for one single day, and the chances are that you will find that every one of them is turning away the finest sort of opportunities every hour of the day. One day I went to visit a friend who was associated with a commercial school in the capacity of solicitor. When I asked him how he was getting along, he replied, "Rotten. I see a large number of people, but I am not making enough sales to give me a good living. In fact, my account with the school is overdrawn, and I am thinking about changing positions as there is no opportunity here." It happened that I was on my vacation and had 10 days' time that I could use as I wished. So I challenged his remark that he had no opportunity by telling him that I could turn his position into $250 in a week's time and show him how to make it worth that every week thereafter. He looked at me in amazement and asked me not to joke with him over so serious a matter. When he was finally convinced that I was in earnest, he ventured to inquire how I would perform the miracle. Then I asked him if he had ever heard of organized effort, to which he replied, "What do you mean organized effort? What do you mean by organized effort?" I informed him that I had reference to the direction of his efforts in such a manner that he would enroll from 5 to 10 students with the same amount of effort that he had been putting into the enrollment of one or of none. He said he was willing to be shown, so I gave him instructions to arrange for me to speak before the employees of one of the local department stores. He made the appointment, and I delivered the address. In my talk, I outlined a plan through which the employees could not only increase their ability so that they could earn more money in their present positions, but it also offered them an opportunity to prepare themselves for greater responsibilities and better positions. Following my talk, which of course was designed for a purpose, my friend enrolled 8 of those employees for night courses in the commercial school which he represented. The following night, he booked me for a similar address before the employees of a laundry, and following the address, he enrolled 3 more students, 2 of them young women who worked over the washing machines at the hardest sort of labor. 2 days later, he booked me for an address before the employees of one of the local banks, and following the address, he enrolled 4 more students, making a total of 15 students, and the entire time consumed was not more than 6 hours, including the time required for the delivery of the addresses and the enrollment of the students. My friend's commission on the transactions was a little over $400. These places of employment were within 15 minutes walk of this man's place of business, but he had never thought of looking there for business. Neither had he ever thought of allying himself with a speaker who could assist him in group selling. That man now owns a splendid commercial school of his own, and I am informed that his net income last year was over $10,000. Um, that would be like $145,000 today. Fear no man who hate no man. Wish no one misfortune, and more than likely you will have plenty of friends. No opportunities come your way. Perhaps they come, but you do not see them. Perhaps you will see them in the future as you are preparing yourself through the aid of this reading course on the law of success, so that you can recognize an opportunity when you see it. The fifth lesson of this course is on the subject of imagination, which was the chief factor that entered into the transaction that I have just related. Imagination plus a definite plan plus self confidence plus action were the main factors that entered into this transaction. You now know how to use all of these, and before you shall have finished this lesson, you will understand how to direct these factors through self control. Now, let us examine the scope of meaning of the term self control as it is used in connection with this course by describing the general conduct of a person who possesses it. A person with well developed self control does not indulge in hatred, envy, jealousy, fear, revenge, or any similar destructive emotions. A person with well developed self control does not go into ecstasies or become ungovernably enthusiastic over anything or anybody. Greed and selfishness and self approval beyond the point of accurate self analysis and appreciation of one's actual merits indicate lack of self control in one of its most dangerous forms. Self confidence is one of the important essentials of success. When this faculty is developed beyond the point of reason, it becomes very dangerous. Self sacrifice is a commendable quality, but when it is carried to extremes, it also becomes one of the dangerous forms of lack of self control. You owe it to yourself not to permit your emotions to place your happiness in the keeping of another person. Love is essential for happiness, but the person who loves so deeply that his or her happiness is placed entirely in the hands of another resembles the little lamb who crept into the den of the nice, gentle little wolf and begged to be permitted to lie down and go to sleep, or the canary bird that persisted in playing with the cat's whiskers. A person with well developed self control will not permit himself to be influenced by the cynic or the pessimist, nor will he permit another person to do his thinking for him. A person with well developed self control will stimulate his imagination and his enthusiasm until they have produced action, but he will then control that action and not permit it to control him. A person with well developed self control will never, under any circumstances, slander another person or seek revenge for any cause whatsoever. A person with self control will not hate those who do not agree with them. Instead, he will endeavor to understand the reason for their disagreement and profit by it. We come now to a form of lack of self control, which causes more grief than all other forms combined. It is the habit of forming opinions before studying the facts. We will not analyze this particular form in detail in this lesson for the reason that it is fully covered in Lesson 10 on accurate thought. But the subject of self control could not be covered without at least a passing reference to this common evil to which we all more or less which we are all more or less addicted. No one has any right to form an opinion that is not based upon that which he believes to be facts, or upon a reasonable hypothesis. Yet, if you will observe yourself carefully, you will catch yourself forming opinions on nothing more substantial than your desire for a thing to be or not to be. Another grievous lack of self-control is the spending habit. I have reference, of course, to the habit of spending beyond one's needs. This habit has become so prevalent since the close of the World War that is alarming. A well-known economist has prophesied that 3 more generations will transform the United States from the richest country in the world to the poorest if the children are not taught the savings habit as a part of their training in both the schools and the homes. On every hand, we see people buying automobiles on the installment plan instead of buying homes. Within the last 15 years, the automobile fad has become so popular that literally tens of thousands of people are mortgaging their fortunes to own cars. A prominent scientist who has a keen sense of humor has prophesied that not only will this habit grow lean bank accounts, but if persisted in, it will eventually grow babies whose legs will have become transformed into wheels. This is a speed mad, money spending age in which we are living. And the uppermost thought in the minds of most of us is to live faster than our neighbors. Not long ago, the general manager of a concern that employs 600 men and women became alarmed over the large number of his employees who were becoming involved with loan sharks and decided to put an end to this evil. When he completed his investigation, he found that only 9% of his employees had savings accounts, and the other 30 of the other 91% who had no money ahead, 75% were in debt in one form or another, some of them being hopelessly involved financially. Of those who were in debt, 210 owned automobiles. We are creatures of imitation. We find it hard to resist the temptation to do that which we see others do. If our neighbor buys a Buick, we must imitate him, and if we cannot scrape together enough to make the first payment on a Buick, we must at least have a Ford. Meanwhile, we take no heed of the morrow. The old-fashioned rainy day nest egg has become obsolete. We live from day to day. We buy our coal by the pound and our flour in 5-pound sacks, thereby paying a third more for it than it ought to cost, because it is distributed in small quantities. Of course, this warning does not apply to you. It is intended only for those who are binding themselves in the chains of poverty by spending beyond their earning capacity, and who have not yet heard that there are definite laws which must be observed by all who would attain success. The automobile is one of the modern wonders of the world, but it is more often a luxury than it is a necessity, and tens of thousands of people who are now stepping on the gas at a lively pace are going to see some dangerous skidding when their rainy days arrive. It requires considerable self control to use the streetcars as a means of transportation when people all around us are driving automobiles. But all who exercise this self control are practically sure to see the day when many who are now driving cars will be either riding the streetcars or walking. It was this modern tendency to spend the entire income which prompted Henry Ford to safeguard his employees with certain restrictions when he established his famous $5 a day minimum wage scale. 20 years ago, if a boy wanted a wagon, he fashioned the wheels out of boards and had the pleasure of building it himself. Now, if a boy wants a wagon, he cries for it and gets it. Lack of self control is being developed in the oncoming generations by their parents who have become victims of the spending habit. 3 generations ago, practically any boy could mend his own shoes and the family cobbling outfit with the family cobbling outfit. Today, the boy takes his shoes to the counter shoe shop and pays $1.75 for heels and half soles. And this habit is by no means confined to the rich and well-to-do classes. I repeat, the spending habit is turning America into a nation of paupers. I am safe in assuming that you are struggling to attain success, for if you were not, you would not be reading this course. Let me remind you that a little savings account will attract many an opportunity to you that would not come your way without it. The size of the account is not so important as is the fact that you have established the savings habit, for this habit marks you as a person who exercises an important form of self control. The modern tendency of those who work for a salary is to spend it all. If a man who receives $3,000 a year and manages to get along on it fairly well, receives an increase of $1,000 a year, does he continue to live on $3,000 and place the increased portion of his income in the savings bank? No, not unless he is one of the few who have developed the savings habit. Then, what does he do with this additional $1,000? He trades in the old automobile and buys a more expensive one. And at the end of the year, he is poorer on a $4,000 income than he was the previous year on a $3,000 income. This is a modern 20th century model. American that I am describing, and you will be lucky if, upon close analysis, you do not find yourself to be in one of this class. Somewhere between the miser who hoards every penny who gets his hands on in an old sock and the man who spends every cent he can earn or borrow, there is a happy medium. And if you enjoy life with reasonable assurance of average freedom and contentment, you must find this halfway point and adopt it as a part of your self control program. Ask any wise man what he most desires, and he will more than likely say, more wisdom. Self discipline is the most essential factor in the development of personal power because it enables you to control your appetite and your tendency to spend more than you earn and your habit of striking back at those who offend you and the other destructive habits which cause you to dissipate your energies through non-productive efforts that takes on forms too numerous to be cataloged in this lesson. Very early in my public career, I was shocked when I learned how many people there were there are who devote most of their energies to tearing down that which the builders construct. By some queer turn of the wheel of fate, one of these destroyers crossed my path by making it his business to try to destroy my reputation. At first, I was inclined to strike back at him, but as I sat at my typewriter late one night, I thought a thought came to me which changed my entire attitude toward this man. Removing the sheet of paper that was in my typewriter, I inserted another one on which I stated this thought in these words. You have a tremendous advantage over the man who does you an injury. You have it within your power to forgive him, while he has no such advantage over you. As I finished writing those lines, I made up my mind that I had come to the point at which I had to decide upon a policy that would serve as a guide concerning my attitude toward those who criticized my work or tried to destroy my reputation. I reached I reached this decision by reasoning something after this fashion. Two courses of action were open to me. I could waste much of my time and energy in striking back at those who would try to destroy me, or I could devote this energy to furthering my life work and let the result of that work serve as my sole answer to all who would criticize my efforts or question my motives. I decided upon the latter as being the better policy and adopted it. By their deeds you shall know them. If your deeds are constructive and you are at peace with yourself in your own heart, you will not find it necessary to stop and explain your motives, for they will explain themselves. The world soon forgets its destroyers. It builds into monuments. It builds its monuments to and bestows its honors upon none but its builders. Keep this fact in mind, and you will more easily reconcile yourself to the policy of refusing to waste your energies by striking back at those who offend you. Every person who amounts to anything in the world comes to the point sooner or later at which he is forced to settle this question of policy toward his enemies. And if you want proof that it pays to exercise sufficient self control to refrain from dissipating your vital energies by striking back, then study the records of all who have risen to high stations in life and observe how carefully they curbed this destructive habit. It is a well known fact that no man ever reached a high station in life without opposition of a violent nature from jealous and envious enemies. A late President Warren G. Harding and ex President Wilson and John H. Patterson of the National Cash Register Company, and scores of others whom I could mention, were victims of this cruel tendency of a certain type of depraved man to destroy reputation. But these men wasted no time explaining or striking back at their enemies. They exercised self control. I do not know but that these attacks on men who are in public life, cruel and unjust, and untruthful as they often are, serve a good purpose. In my own case, I know that I made a discovery that was of great value to me. As a result of a series of bitter attacks which a contemporary journalist launched against me, I paid no attention to these attacks for 4 or 5 years. until finally they became so bold that I decided to override my policy and strike back at my antagonist. I sat down at my typewriter and began to write. In all of my experience as a writer, I do not believe I ever assembled such a collection of biting adjectives as those which I used on this occasion. The more I wrote, the more angry I became until I had written all that I could think of on the subject. As the last line was finished, a strange feeling came over me. It was not a feeling of bitterness toward the man who had tried to injure me. It was a feeling of compassion, of sympathy, of forgiveness. I had unconsciously psychoanalyzed myself by releasing over the keys of my typewriter the repressed emotions of hate and resentment which I had been unintentionally gathering in my subconscious mind over a long period of years. Now, if I find myself becoming very angry, I sit down at my typewriter and write it out of my system and throw away the manuscript or file it away as an exhibit for my scrapbook to which I can refer back in the years to come, after the evolutionary processes have carried me still higher in the realm of understanding. While others may sidetrack your ambitions, not a few times, remember that discouragement most frequently comes from within. Repressed emotions, especially the emotion of hatred, resemble a bomb that has been constructed of high explosives, and unless they are handled with as much understanding of their nature as an expert would handle a bomb, they are as dangerous. A bomb may be rendered harmless by explosion in an open field, or by disintegration in a bath of the proper sort. Also, a feeling of anger or hatred may be rendered harmless by giving expression to it in a manner that harmonizes with the principle of analysis, psychoanalysis. Before you can achieve success in the higher and broader sense, you must gain such thorough control over yourself that you will be a person of poise. You are the product of at least a million years of evolutionary change. For countless generations preceding you, nature has been tempering and refining the materials that have gone into your makeup. Step by step, she has removed from the generations that have preceded you the animal instincts and baser passions until she has produced in you the finest specimen of animal that lives. She has endowed you through this slow evolutionary process with reason and poise and balance sufficient to enable you to control and to do with yourself whatever you will. No other animal has ever been endowed with such self control as you possess. You have been endowed with the power to use the most highly organized form of energy known to man, that of thought. It is not improbable that thought is the closest connecting link there is between the material, physical things of this world and the world of divinity. You have not only the power to think, but what is a thousand times more important still, you have the power to control your thoughts and direct them to do your bidding. We are coming now to the really important part of this lesson. Read slowly and meditatively. I approach this part of this lesson almost with fear and trembling, for it brings us face to face with a subject which but few men are qualified to discuss with reasonable intelligence. I repeat, you have the power to control your thoughts and make them do your bidding. I repeat, you have the power to control your thoughts and make them do your bidding. Your brain may be likened to a dynamo in this respect, that it generates a set or sets into motion the mysterious energy called thought. The stimuli that starts your brain into action are of two sorts. One is autosuggestion and the other is suggestion. You can select the material out of which your thinking is produced, and that is autosuggestion or self-suggestion. You can permit others to select the material out of which your thinking is produced, and that is suggestion. It is it is a humiliating fact that most thought is produced by the outside suggestions of others, and it is more humiliating still to have to admit that the majority of us accept the suggestion without either examining it or questioning its soundness. We read the daily papers as though every word were based upon fact. We are swayed by the gossip and idle chatter of others as though every word were true. Thought is the only thing over which you have absolute control. Yet, unless you are the proverbial exception, which is about 1 out of every 10,000, you permit other people to enter the sacred mansion of your mind, and there deposit through suggestion their troubles and woes, adversities and falsehoods, just as though you did not have the power to close the door and keep them out. You have within your control the material that constitutes the dominating thoughts of your mind, and just as surely as you are reading these lines, those thoughts which dominate your mind will bring you success or failure, according to their nature. The fact that thought is the only thing which you have absolute control is, within itself, of most profound significance, as it strongly suggests that thought is your nearest approach to divinity on this earthly plane. This fact also carries another highly impressive suggestion, namely, that thought is your most important tool, the one with which you may shape your worldly destiny according to your own liking. Surely, divine providence did not make thought the sole power over which you have absolute control without associating with that power potentialities which, if understood and developed, would stagger the imagination. Self control is solely a matter of thought control. Please read the foregoing sentence aloud. Read it thoughtfully and meditate over it before reading further, because it is, without doubt, the most important single sentence of this entire course. Self control is solely a matter of thought control. You are studying this course, presumably, because you are earnestly seeking truth and understanding sufficient to enable you to attain some high station in life. You are searching for the magic key that will unlock the door to the source of power, and yet you have the key in your own hands, and you may make use of it the moment you learn to control your thoughts. Place in your own mind, through the principle of autosuggestion, positive, constructive thoughts, which harmonize with your definite chief aim in life, and that mind will transform your thoughts into physical reality and hand them back to you as a finished product. This is thought control. When you deliberately choose the thoughts which dominate your mind and firmly refuse admittance to outside suggestion, you are exercising self control in its highest and most efficient form. Man is the only living animal that can do this. How many millions of years nature has required in which to produce this animal, no one knows. But every intelligent student of psychology knows that the dominating thoughts determine the actions and nature of the animal. The process through which one may think accurately is a subject that has been reserved for lesson 10 of this course. The point we wish clearly to establish in this lesson is that thought, whether accurate or inaccurate, is the most highly organized functioning power of your mind, and that you are but the sum total of your dominating or most prominent thoughts. If you would be a master salesman, whether of goods and wares or of personal services, you must exercise sufficient self control to shut out all adverse arguments and suggestions. Most salesmen have so little self control that they hear the prospective purchaser say no even before he says it. Not a few salesmen hear this fatal word no even before they come into the presence of their prospective purchaser. They have so little self control that they actually suggest to themselves that the prospective purchaser will say no when asked to purchase their wares. How different is the man of self control? He not only suggests to himself that his prospective purchaser will say yes, but if the desired yes is not forthcoming, He stays on the job until he breaks down the opposition and forces a yes. If his prospective purchaser says no, he does not hear it. If his prospective purchaser says no a second and a third and a fourth time, he does not hear it, for he is a man of self control, and he permits no suggestions to reach his mind except those which he desires to influence him. The master salesman, whether he be engaged in selling merchandise or personal services or sermons or public addresses, understands how to control his own thoughts. Instead of being a person who accepts with meek submission the suggestions of others, he is a person who persuades others to accept his suggestions by controlling himself and placing only positive thoughts in his own mind. He thereby becomes a dominating personality, a master salesman. This too is self control. A master salesman is one who takes the offensive and never the defensive side of an argument, if argument arises. Please read the foregoing sentence again. Excuse me. A master salesman is one who takes the offensive and never the defensive side of an argument, if argument arises. Please read the okay. If you are a master salesman, you know that it is necessary for you to keep your prospective purchaser on the defensive. And you also know that it will be fatal to your sale if you permit him to place you on the defensive and keep you there. You may, and of course you will at times, be placed in a position in which you will have to assume the defensive side of the conversation for a time. But it is your business to exercise such perfect poise and self control that you will change places with your prospective purchaser without his noticing that you have done so by placing him back on the defensive. People like to use their excess energy by chewing the rag. W. M. Wrigley Jr. capitalized this human trait by giving them a stick of spearmint. Most salesmen sweep this vital point aside by becoming angry and trying to scare the prospective purchaser into submission. But the master salesman remains calm and serene and usually comes out the winner. The word salesman has reference to all people who try to persuade or convince others by logical argument or appeal to self interest. We are all salesmen, or at least we should be, no matter what form of service we are rendering or what sort of goods we are offering. The ability to negotiate with other people without friction, argument is the outstanding quality of all successful people. Observe those nearest you and notice how few there are who understand this art of tactful negotiation. Observe also how successful are the few who understand this art, despite the fact that they may have less education than those whom they negotiate. It is a knack that can be cultivated. The art of successful negotiation grows out of patient and painstaking self control. Notice how easily the successful salesman exercises self control when he is handling a customer who is impatient. In his heart, such a salesman may be boiling over, but you will see no evidence of it in his face or manner of words. He has acquired the art of tactful negotiation. A single frown of disapproval or single word denoting impatience will often spoil a sale, and no one knows this better than the successful salesman. He makes it his business to control his feelings, and as a reward, he sets his own salary mark and chooses his own position. Okay, head on over to thelawofsuccessmastermind.com or inspirelansing.com. The Law of Success Mastermind will have lots of resources for you, let you listen to all the episodes of the podcast. InspireLansing.com just shows what we are working on. Thank you. I appreciate you, and have a great day.